We've got a terrific panel who between them commission well in excess of 600 hours of content a year. So what they're looking for, what they're not looking for, well worth listening to. Like everybody at the moment in television, they're trying to work out and thinking very hard, all of them, about how to hold on to existing audiences and pull in new audiences. So we're going to spend most of this session talking about the different ways that they're hunting for and nurturing those points of difference on their different platforms, all of which are very different. There will be, apparently, roving mics, so you can ask questions as we go along. Please wait for me to sort of point to you. Please wait for the mic to come over. And, of course, there will be time at the end also to ask questions. So I'm going to introduce our panel to those of you who don't know them. I'm actually going to look at this piece of paper, not because I don't know them, but because some of them have got very long job titles, and I'm going to get them wrong. So we have Hamish, Mykura, with, I think, a 10-word job title.
Wow.
He is Executive Vice President, Programming and Development, National Geographic Channel International. At the other end, with a word count just beating him of 14 words, we've got Ed Sayer, who is Head of Original Commissioning Discovery Networks UK, sorry, I'm stumbling a bit here, and Vice President of Production and Development. We've got Lucy Willis, who has a mercifully short job title. She is Commissioning Editor, Factual, Channel 5. We have Tom McDonald, Head of Commissioning, Specialist Factual and Natural History at the BBC. And we have Shaminder, Nahal, who is Commissioning Editor, Arts, Topical and History, Channel 4, although she says it's also just Specialist Factual. So we'll call you Commissioning Editor for Specialist Factual. So, Ed, 5 words that describe Specialist Factual for your platform.
Real-life entertainment, authenticity, and technical excellence.
Oh my God, you bust the word count already.
Yeah, but the real life is hyphenated.
Okay,
yeah.
And a show that you're enjoying on another channel, loving it on another channel at the moment. What are you watching?
Oh gosh, there is...
You're not watching any telly?
I'm not watching any telly, I try not to. There's loads of good stuff, so I don't want to single out anything.
Oh, gosh, it's going to be one of those panels.
Well, I mean, I'm watching a lot of stuff on Netflix and Amazon.
Okay.
I'm watching one of their sporting docs on Amazon about the All Blacks.
Yes,
I don't know what it's called.
Yeah.
It's very good, though.
Good, excellent.
Access.
Shaminder, Specialist Factual on Channel 4.
Really different to everyone else.
Oh, that's really different to everyone else. Very good.
And I counted it. You know, I toyed with should it be really very or mind-blowingly different to everyone else, but basically different to everyone else.
Very good. And what's your TV crush at the moment? Who are you loving or what are you liking on another channel?
Are you going to also ask me my favourite show?
Yeah, sort of the same thing.
Well, so my crush and my favourite show is the Donald Glover Childish Gambino video, This is America, which I know isn't all that original to say you love it, but the way it sort of has smashed its way around the world and has got so many amazing layers and blows your mind is how I would like our Specialist Factual to be.
That's an incredible reference. Lucy, how would you describe Specialist Factual on Channel 5?
So I would say Specialist Factual on Channel 5 is broad, accessible, intelligent, exciting, and pleasurable.
Very good.
Words,
excellent. And what are you loving on another channel?
Well, I really loved An English Scandal, actually. I know it's a drama, but I suppose it's kind of, you know, a drama about a contemporary historical story, and I thought it was fabulous. And I thought Hugh Grant was a revelation in it, actually. Who knew that he could sort of play a baddie in that way? So that was my most sort of recent favourite.
There's a lot of factually inspired drama around at the moment.
There is, isn't there? Yeah.
Tom?
Yeah.
5 words.
Yeah.
So I was going to say breadth, depth, intelligence. I don't want to say innovation, but I will. And fun. You know, I think Specialist Factual should be fun.
It's a nice word. It's good to hear that in the mix. And so what is What's your favourite TV
Well,
programme?
I feel slightly embarrassed now because Shaminder's been talking about Childish Gambino, you're talking about Being Chandler. I was just saying to Lucy, I absolutely love Cruising with Jane McDonald, but obviously...
And who is your current favourite Love Island contestant?
No, we're not talking Love Island because it's too early. It's too early days. But no, I really love Cruising with Jane McDonald, but I'm also addicted to this series of The Bridge. I find it very annoying it's on once a week. Just saying, Patrick,
Just
if you're
saying.
here.
Yes. Hamish, 5 words.
Well, so science, adventure, exploration, access, and on-brand. On-brand hyphenated.
Yeah.
There you are.
You two both love busting the word count, don't you?
I can do more words than you.
And what are you loving on another channel?
Oh, well, I must say I've loved The Defiant Ones. If anyone hasn't watched that, check it out. Superb documentary making. I've also enjoyed Benedict Cumberbatch crushing it as Patrick Melrose.
Oh, gosh,
really
yes,
amazingly
yeah.
good.
Could have gone horribly wrong.
Yeah.
I also watch quite a lot of Forged in Fire at the moment.
Ah.
Really, what a treat.
That's a sleeper hit, isn't
Yeah.
it, for them? Yeah, yeah. Very good. Okay, so everybody's got some clips to show, and we're going to, I think, Ed, start with you. Obviously, you're commissioning for a pretty male-skewing channel, and it's, they're in a subscription universe. Do you find that your audience wants the tried and tested, the familiar, the comfort of that when they come to you, or do they let you? Does your audience let you do new things?
Well, first off, actually, so I think people get a bit confused about Discovery and the place that I work. So I don't just commission for the Discovery channel. I commission for the entire suite of all our channels, both in our free-to-air and pay ecosystem.
So name them, just for the audience who maybe don't know.
I think everyone's aware of the pay channels like TLC and ID and Discovery, but also you've got Quest and Quest Red. And also, we also commission for all our free-to-airs around Europe as well. So on to the next point is we're not just, although, Quest and Quest Red are differentiated, for instance, as kind of male channel and female channel, I think, funnily enough, and on Discovery, that a third of all our viewers are women. And so, and what we do, our team, when we commission, we try and find shared experiences, I think. I think that, they're always going to be predominantly, if we're talking about the male channels in particular, they're always going to, the ideas have to be predominantly male first, but they have to be inclusive, because you don't want anyone going, oh, turn that off in your own time, please. So we try and find the broadest subject matters, and also we really kind of dig deep, try and find compelling questions and universal truths at the heart of our propositions.
So do you want to, just so that we can make it a bit more real, do you want to play the clip that you've got, and then we can talk a little bit about how that delivers on some of those?
So in fact, we're announcing today our new Ed Stafford survival show called Ed Stafford First Man Out, and it really is. And I talked about those key words, real life and entertainment. This is what I hope really captures it. It's very exciting. Ed basically is challenging himself to go up against some of the world's best survival experts.
So what's fresh about that for you? Because I mean, Ed's sort of, he's quite a familiar face. He's done some pretty remarkable things in his time. What's different about? Is this just another Ed Stafford show? No disrespect to Ed, but what's different about?
No, it's definitely not. I think in the world of survival genre I think that past survival experts they're very two-tone kind of. They've been painted as superheroes. And I think what makes Ed really different is that he is prepared to lose. So there's been no other, to my knowledge, survival format where you get two alpha male or alpha female, we have a woman in it, Kat Bigney as well, going head to head. One person will genuinely lose, and that's quite a big deal for survival experts. No one wants to come across as a loser or not being able to survive. And also, Ed is prepared to emote. He will cry, he will bare his soul. So he's not your archetypal macho man.
Should we play the clip?
Yes.
And then we
There's a
can
little
chat
health
more?
warning. For those of you who are about to eat, maybe look away. That's all.
So what are you reaching for there with that the audience can learn from? Is it sort of you trying to push the authenticity of the immersive experience, or what's special about that for you?
There's one of the things that I didn't mention as well, which is actually quite integral to this. It's the first ever survival show, again, to my knowledge, but I'm pretty sure that's been entirely shot in 4K. So Discovery's all about technical excellence and pushing the boundaries of what's possible in factual programming. While also, I think you can get wrapped up in that, and so you forget all your entertainment values. And I think that if, you know, listening to people watching the response to that, you get a little laugh out of it. And so I think that keeping entertainment in the heart of survival is really important, that it's not all about dun dun dun, Ed's going to die, because he doesn't die, and we all know he's not going to die. And so I think it's about keeping the authenticity up, you know, showing, what I love about that clip is, you know, it shows that he is sick, that he is sleeping out, he's not sleeping in a camper van 10 yards down the road, you know. So
well, he's not going wow all the time. Actually, in some ways, that's quite a muted performance there from him.
Correct, yes. It's just about, as you say, his performance is very real, and I think you watch that and totally identify with it. We all know what it's like to throw up, but I think it's ingenious how he uses his sick to make more food.
Hamish, how important would that sort of quality of sort of authentic immersive experience be for you? I mean, I look at Nat Geo and I think of it as a sort of slightly emotion-free zone. I don't know if that's fair. I don't know if it matters. But would that work for you?
I mean, I think that National Geographic is becoming ever more distinct from the kind of fare that you would find on Discovery now. I think we're sort of rather out of the feeding sick to rats game now.
More for you.
There's been a real shift in the programming on Nat Geo. I think that it's best kind of categorized by saying we're trying to be true to the National Geographic yellow border. And I think that more and more we're trying to make programs on the channel that feel as if they belong in the same stable as the National Geographic magazine, as the National Geographic's publications. And
you couldn't see the rat being a cover star then for the magazine.
We'd be nice to the rat and encourage it to live a rat-like lifestyle rather than flattening it.
Okay, okay. And Shaminder, can I ask you as well, because there was a period where it felt like on Channel 4 you were getting a lot of sort of immersive events, you know, whether that's Lev or, you know, Ant or, you know, a whole bunch of people. I mean, is that something that is still part of sort of what Channel 4 want to do in terms of special
I'm
Factual?
never going to turn my nose down at a bit of vomit, because, you know, that can clearly be quite entertaining. And immersive is what we absolutely kind of want. All the things that have been talked about, immersiveness and authenticity, is hugely important for us. And we have got those brilliant people, those things that felt so raw and exciting, like Lev. We've got a series coming up that Alf Laurie commissioned, called Narcos, in which Jason Fox goes to Colombia and Mexico, and it feels incredibly sort of in the thick of it. And Alf also commissioned a thing that's coming up hopefully soon, I'm not sure when, maybe next year, in which an anthropologist called Livia Samoka goes and actually spends a really properly long time living in sort of really fascinating and difficult conditions in Africa. So I think that kind of sense of showing people places they've never seen before in a way they haven't seen done before is still really exciting for us. And there's loads more places for us to discover. And I think whenever we do that, we'll want to be utterly immersed in it and properly kind of living through those situations. So I think that still will have an exciting place in our space.
So I don't want to get sort of too shopping listy too early, but again, sort of just thinking about the audience and sort of, you know, lot of suppliers here. What, you know, how much of that might you be looking for next year, or are you full for next year?
I mean, I should say right now that I'm really thrilled to be on this panel. I'm probably the least grand member of the panel, and I haven't even been doing commissioning for that long. And actually, our department is in a kind of really exciting period because we've had a new director of programs
there's a lot of
at
empty
Channel 4.
desks.
Yeah, we've had a new director of programs at Channel 4 who started this year, Ian Katz, who's set out recently a really exciting vision for the channel. And we've got a new boss of Factual, Danny Horan, starting quite soon. And so I think we're going to keep hold of all our sort of like heart and soul of what Channel 4 is, but we're moving into a new world. So for all of us here, it's really exciting because we're going to find our way through that together, hopefully. But I think more of the sort of nuts and bolts of what our specialist factual and documentaries departments are going to really look like in terms of sort of people and structure is all going to emerge quite soon, but we will definitely still be doing these core things because specialist factual for us is really important on the channel because it's a place where we, explore and explain and reveal stuff about the world. So that will obviously always be there. Now I can't remember the question.
Would you do an immersive experience?
I can't specifically say about whether survival.
Would you do another immersive experience that felt as constructed as, say, Mutiny? Do you think?
I think that kind of decision is going to be very much for, our new bosses to make a decision about. In the end, we just want to make brilliant programs that feel new and different. And, we never sort of hark back to brilliant things like Mutiny that we've done before. We're incredibly proud of them, but we're obviously always trying to find the next thing. So, but then I haven't got that shopping list, so we'll have to wait for the big bosses to say that. But, obviously we always want to be doing new and exciting things, and that's what we're all about. And if it is a new way of doing reality, we're massively up for it.
Tom, just talking about form and how you think about it. It's felt like sort of a year ago, certainly 2 years ago, but even last year here at Sheffield, a lot of talk about sort of, reality meets specialist factual, competitions, things like Mutiny, and it feels like not all of those shows have landed. What's your thinking at the moment on the sort of, reality meets specialist factual space?
Before I answer that, I think one of the things that's really interesting listening to these guys speak is that there's a sort of, especially with Ed and Hamish, that sort of sense of being on brand is obviously very important. The Ed clip is sort of heartland discovery, even if you're sort of tweaking around the sides of it. With Hamish, sort of the yellow border. I think both the strength and I think it's a strength, but I think it's worth sort of articulating that, we as a department commission over 200 hours a year, there is no such thing as a single BBC specialist factual show. There isn't a sort of one form that we work in, one tone that we work in, one sort of type of specialist factual. So I think it's really important when the first word I said was range, and I really, really meant it. I think we're a department that does everything from live events to constructed competition shows, to access documentaries, to full-on series, to, and onwards and onwards and onwards and onwards. So as a team, where we always start is sort of what's the content that's exciting us, the new journalism, the new story, is it relevant and contemporary and important, should we be making it now, and then how the hell should we make it and what's the best fit for it. My sense of that sort of reality, that constructed reality specialist factual space is like all forms, after a while they start to the audience to feel a little bit tired and the tropes in them start to feel incredibly familiar. So we have done a couple of shows like that. So we had a series last year called Astronauts, which was a sort of constructed astronaut competition training show. I think it was brilliantly made.
It's very well made.
But one of the things that I certainly took from it for the BBC Two audience is that level of construction, probably for the Heartland audience, got in the way of the brilliant specialist factual content underneath it. And for the younger audience you're trying to bring in, that level of construction probably wasn't quite hard enough to make them go, this is a really bloody exciting show.
So a slightly uncomfortable mix there, perhaps.
So I think there's a danger that sometimes you end up in this sort of slightly odd middle place where you're not quite delivering enough depth of content, but nor are you delivering enough adrenaline, excitement, blah, blah, blah. For me personally, I've begun to find that trope of sort of adrenalized, right at the edge, will they survive? I think to sort of Ed's point, they survive. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like, and the audience are clever enough to know they bloody survive. So I've begun to find that tired, but more importantly, I think the audience, you've started to see the audience start to go, okay, what else have you got?
Absolutely. Lucy, it's not something that I can think of Channel 5, you know, having sort of tried to meld.
You could say sort of that 10,000 BC, sort of 3 or 4 years ago. So, I mean, it was much more on the reality side than it was on the sort of specialist factual, but, you know, it was taking people back to prehistoric times, Stone Age times.
It's quite a weird show. I quite enjoyed it.
Yeah, the first series did really well. I think the sort of second series dipped a bit, and I think we decided not to do a third series. So we've dipped our toe in that pond. We haven't got any immediate plans, but, you know, I think if a great idea came along, and if we really loved it, we are looking for big ideas at the moment, then we would definitely consider it. I've taken a few into budget round, actually, in the last couple of years, and they've got close. We have a budget round system at Channel 5, but they haven't sort of quite got over the line.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
They're not closed, but not top of your shopping list at the moment.
It's not top of the shopping list, but if someone brought the right idea along, I would be really interested in trying to do it.
Tom's right, though, that it can be a tricky place, so you can miss both audiences in a sense.
It can, but if you get it right, it can also be a really good way to attract a broad audience. So, and I think that's something we're always trying to do at Channel 5, is to attract as broad an audience for history and specialist factual as we can. So I think you're right, it's a tricky path to navigate, but if you get it right, I think you can capture that elusive broad audience and possibly even some of the youngs, which are the very elusive audience sometimes for specialist factual.
I also think, sorry Kim, that the audience rewards originality. So my point is not, I mean, I thought the first series of SAS and in fact the second series were brilliant, but I think there is something about versions of shows appearing on other channels, and I don't think you're often rewarded for it.
Yeah.
The last series was brilliant too. It was amazing. Of SAS.
But do you think you need to sort of, you know, you in particular have got such a remit to innovate?
We always want to innovate, and we always want to do new things. But actually, I'm not the greatest lover of sort of macho things, but I actually was utterly gripped by that, and so were my family. And I thought it did sort of turn the wheel and innovate within the life of that program. So, I mean, you know, I guess all I'm saying is that we don't sort of rule things out. Obviously we're always trying to do new things, but some things you can bring the newness into the shape, the thing you've already got.
No, and I think if you've got a returning brand, of course, you know, it's sort of the heart of our slate is finding returners. And if you've got a returner, you want to nourish it and look after it and evolve it. My point is more about when people go, oh, SAS worked, so what's our SAS? And I think that's when you're not rewarded often.
And there is a thing with specialist factual that sort of, you know, generating returners, which specialist factual does do. They sort of move eventually on success, whether it's SAS or Gogglebox or Inside the Factory or, you know, many, many others. They sort of move almost out of specialist factual, at least in terms of perception, and just become high-rating shows, don't they?
Also, they mean something to people. Like, you know, it's not, I don't think it's a sort of cold thing about, oh, that worked and it's going to return. Like, they start to actually mean something in people's lives, and they look forward to watching it, and they, you know, and I think you can still bring those great shows back without kind of making them feel the same. And, you know, I think it's brilliant when those shows can become sort of part of the fabric of people's lives in a way, and things that are sort of both a treat and make them think. So that's
back to that emotional
what we want
connection.
to do. Yeah.
Tom, I want to talk a little bit, ask you a little bit about the range of ways that you are trying to push innovation at specialist factual at the BBC, because, you know, as you were saying earlier, enormous, there's enormous range to what you do. I mean, arguably, specialist factual, you know, in many ways props up many of the BBC schedules. It rates better than factual entertainment on the BBC. It's a, you know, highly successful genre. But there is that pressure sometimes to do the traditional as well, and it can be hard to push back against the perception that the BBC is doing traditional. So talk to us a little bit about the ways in which, the different ways that you're reaching for innovation at the BBC or professionals.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right that there is a sort of, there's probably an internal conversation that happens often about sort of what specialist factual is at the BBC. And there's always been a distinction between sort of popular and landmark, and I'm sure you remember those conversations when you were at the BBC. I always find that distinction a false distinction, in truth, because I think you have to think about how the audience watches telly. To Shaminder's point, no one's watching it going, oh, look at brilliant specialist factual show, amazing. And I don't think anyone's going, oh, that's a landmark show from the BBC or a popular show from the BBC. Often the thing you think is popular doesn't necessarily rate as well as the thing you've called landmark. But so I'll cite a couple of things before showing a clip, but there are 2 series that we launched this year, both very different to one another, both returning now. So Surgeons, which Dragonfly make, and A House Through Time. The reason I cite those shows is that in some ways at the heart of them is traditional specialist factual content. You know, Surgeons is about cutting-edge surgery, pioneering medical science, which you would expect from the BBC. House Through Time is a social history series that charts the fortunes of one house and its residents from the year it was built until the present day. The content that tips out of those shows, I think, is very traditional specialist factual. I think the form of both those shows show an ambition on our part, and my team's part, to go, you don't have to do the straight presenter-led, expected BBC Two doc, where someone essentially, the walking around a field doc. And there are versions of Surgeons and House Through Time, which would be that show. I mean, one of the things, I know we're going to talk about talent, we actually, in history in particular, have moved away specifically and intentionally from too many presenter-led shows. So we've spent a lot of time in the past year using expert voices in different ways, either as a sort of multitude of voices, as in Elizabeth First Secret Agents, or with no voices at all, so letting the people who lived and experienced it tell their story. It's why we've sort of pivoted towards contemporary 20th century history for the past 18 months. So I think part of what we're doing all the time is to go, how do you retain the depth of content that I think our audiences expect and should expect from us, and how do you make sure that the form in which you deliver them can speak to a bigger and broader audience who aren't specialist factual people?
So we probably should play your clip, but I'd really like you to also just talk to the audience a little bit about, so if they were thinking about bringing you a 9 o'clock offer, a 9 o'clock idea that was trying to do exactly that, so deliver on all the promise and the content that a BBC audience expects of specialist factual, and yet make it feel sort of contemporary. What, 2 or 3 things, do's and don'ts, that they might find useful? Just, do you want to think about that after we play?
Can I?
Yes. Homework.
Can I just tee up the clip?
Yes,
first of all?
do. Give them context.
So this is from a series which will be on air on BBC Two this autumn. It's about babies. Now, the thing to say, first of all, is lots of series have been made in the past about babies. It's hardly a new specialist factual subject. One of the things that Sanjay and Voltage, a production company who brought this series to us, promised is that there would be new science underpinning this series. So this is a clip which is a sort of demo/experiment which is about fairness and race. The thing you need to know before you watch the clip is that the white person you were about to see has behaved, the baby has seen that white person behave in an unfair way. So this clip is about what happens when the baby, or the little toddler, knows that the white person has been unfair.
Really interesting. That's quite an explosive clip in lots of ways. Tell us a bit more about
the interesting thing for me is that, what I love about the potential of this series is it's a very well-trodden, broad subject. It's been delivered in a way, or is going to be delivered in a way that feels like that sort of broad, entertaining entry point is there. There'll be joy in it, but it's going to difficult places and asking difficult questions. I mean, one of the things that we think about quite a lot, we did a series last year called No More Boys and Girls, a gender experiment in a school. The series itself didn't do mega numbers on BBC Two. I didn't expect it to either. But there was one clip which was called the Baby X experiment, where you dress babies of different genders in different clothes and see how people react to them. So the boy dresses a girl, the girl dresses a boy. That clip got millions of hits on YouTube, lots and lots of chatter about it. So one of the great things about the experiments here is that also we know that they'll work in the digital space. So there are some people who watch the whole film or the whole series. There are others who will find it digitally. And the other thing to say, although you didn't get to see very much of her, is that Dr. Goody Singh, who is the presenter of the series, expert presenter on the series, we are working incredibly hard to find new faces and new voices, not just on BBC Two, on BBC One and BBC Four. And this is an opportunity with a subject which you know is going to draw in an audience to take a risk on a completely new piece of talent.
We're going to talk about talent a bit more in a moment, but just sticking with the content for a moment. So are you saying that, you know, because it's a bit of a parody, but there's a sense in which sort of specialist factual as subject matter, as genre, can feel a bit timeless. Do you know what I mean? Are you aggressively hunting for ways to refract contemporary debates?
Definitely.
Through specialist factual?
I mean, in everything we do. It's probably very, very obvious, or more obvious when it comes to some of the pieces we're doing in religion. So if you think about Maureen Begg's film Islam, Women and Me that we did for BBC One, or our Kibbutz series that's coming later this year, they are very, very obviously journalistic, timely, topical. But then even if you look at something like Elizabeth I's Secret Agents or the Blitz series that we did last year, what spoke to me about the Blitz series was that actually the first episode was about London and the response of the authorities when London was bombed and the failure of those authorities. And you couldn't fail but to see the resonances with Grenfell. You know, it's partly accidental, but those resonances were definitely there.
Did you surface those?
Yeah, without a doubt. And without saying, look, the last thing I would want to do is sort of say in commentary or have an expert go, guess what, guys, it's a bit like Grenfell, just in case you hadn't noticed. Grenfell was not mentioned in that film once, in the same way that in Elizabeth I's Secret Agents, we didn't mention surveillance in modern Britain. I mean, I find that sometimes specialist factual can do that slightly heavy-handed, slightly creaky. This is really, really relevant, guys. We don't do that. But what we're trying to do is sort of surface things that people are talking about in surprising ways. And you can find contemporary resonance in Tudor Britain in the same way that you can find contemporary resonance in World War II Britain.
And that's part of your development conversation across the commissioning team and with your suppliers?
Yeah, all the time. And even when we're doing things which are sort of more traditionally landmark, we've got a Brian Cox series that's not yet been announced, but it's underpinned by new scientific discovery and revelation. Even with the natural history department, and I'm not going to talk about natural history here because it sort of plays by different rules, does a different thing, but a lot of the conversation, yes, there's technological innovation, but a lot of the conversation we have is sort of how do we reflect the natural world now? You know, Blue Planet 2, for all its awe and wonder and spectacularness, the things that people remember is plastic.
So is this sort of, just to sort of cut through a bit, is this the sort of, are you saying that sort of a why now prism is increasingly important as you look to choose amongst, you know, the vast array of sort of possibilities that one could do?
Without a doubt, but the thing that I really there's a balancing act there, isn't there? Because I think why now, if you go very, very sort of narrowly issues-driven, I think specialist factual can become very niche very quickly. And I think the thing that I'd say that we have done as a department successfully, we've probably done lots of things unsuccessfully, but specialist factual at the BBC broadly rates and speaks to a big, broad audience. And I'm really proud of that. You know, I want our content to not feel, I always say this, specialist shouldn't mean niche factual, specialist should mean expert factual, and it has to have a distinctiveness about it. So babies, in a way, the reason I want to show that clip, babies, for me, popular subject, new science, contemporary relevance, but packaged in a way where actually you might get home to have your tea, put your kids to bed, do the stuff that people do when they get home, and they might actually fancy watching it.
Shaminder, how much at Channel 4 at the moment are you thinking about, or what kind of conversation are you having about, this is sort of, you know, this is polishing our brand, it's sort of, you know, making Channel 4 feel like sort of an edgy destination versus these are the things that we really hope will rate and reach a big audience. And I don't mean rate in a sort of, you know, as you were saying earlier, a cold way, but just that, you know, reaching large numbers of people as part of your remit. How are you having those conversations at the moment? I
mean, I think we've always had, and it's been, you know, talked about constantly. We always want to make programs that appeal to the, you know, a broad audience, but always have that kind of slight Channel 4 twist and energy to them. What's the most recent example that has succeeded in doing that on the channel? Well, I think Biggest Little Railway in the World, which Rob Coldstream commissioned, was really popular, watched by young people. It was a brilliantly, you know, it had great scale and ambition because it was kind of all these model rail enthusiasts wanted to build the sort of longest model railway in the world, 71 miles across the Scottish Highlands, had never been achieved in Victorian times. And so it had all that kind of broad sort of scale and felt really kind of tapped into that kind of the joy of hobbyism and sort of like
and what was
little
Channel
things.
4 about that?
Well,
I mean, I thought it was a great show.
Because it had all of that scale, but then it also had sort of madness and craziness at its heart, which is, it wasn't like real life trains, it was like tiny model trains, and it was something that, you know, was sort of spectacularly bizarre, you know,
so that's sort of bizarreness and
it's a kind of, it's something that's joyful and broad and popular, but has a kind of real sort of quirkiness and craziness at its heart, which is, I always feel like, you know, we want big, broad, popular shows that people love and enjoy and look forward to watching, but even within that, you know, they've got a little Channel 4 sort of kink in them somewhere, a little shadow of craziness that makes it feel like us. So I guess that's the sort of big picture. But actually, you know, like Ian Katz was talking recently when he talked about his vision, you know, we want all of those things, but, you know, with our sort of cross-subsidy model, we've always then wanted to create space for like total madness and experimentation and craziness, and I can't believe they're doing that, and you wouldn't see that anywhere else. And so we are absolutely wanting to kind of drive that message out there now. You know, we've talked about, you know, experimentation at 11 o'clock, which I'll talk about in a minute with one of my clips. You know, space for sort of risk-taking, you know, which is what we massively want to have, even more space to do that, and sort of having loads more spaces on all of our different platforms for taking risk and finding new talent, and kind of changing things up a bit. So it feels like an exciting time for us. Of course, we want the big, broad, popular things, but we're also kind of saying, you know, our doors are more open than ever before for people's maddest, craziest, you know, ideas.
Mad and crazy ideas for Channel 4, please. Tom, can we talk a little bit about history specifically? Because I think that has been, perhaps of all the sort of specialist factual genres, the biggest challenge for the BBC. You know, there's a lot of sort of, you know, there's always another anniversary, there's always another sort of call for another bit of traditional programming. You yourself talked about the number of sort of presenter pieces. I think you've got a clip that it would be good to have a look at.
Yeah, and it might be good to look at the clip first.
Yeah.
So we have a film going out this Wednesday, made by Blast, commissioned by Simon Young, called Before Grenfell. The film came from a conversation with Blast about Kensington and the origins of inequality in Kensington. And if you sort of look at Grenfell through a slightly different prism, which is sort of for how long has Kensington been a place of sort of rich and poor, do you get a fresh and different perspective on that story? So I'll just show you the clip.
That was a beautiful clip and actually really revealing and insightful. Talk to us a little bit about it.
Look, one of the things that Simon and the team and I talk about all the time is how do you give, if it's 20th century history, how do you give the people who live through it a voice rather than it being... So one of the things we know is a challenge with Specialist Factual is sometimes I think presenters can, and we know this is true especially for younger audiences, that the presenter, rather than making you feel like you're part of a story, can create a sort of a window through which it feels like you've got to sort of push through and get through. So this is one way of doing something that feels much less mediated than the history content before. I think history in the past, a couple of years ago, you know, Martin, my predecessor, I think did an extraordinary job. And, you know, for those of you who are going to Mary Beard later, Martin was a really significant part of finding Mary Beard and putting her on the BBC. But I think when I took over history, it had got to a place where there was a sort of monoform to how history was delivered, and it tended to be a presenter giving you a sort of encyclopedic story over the course of 3 episodes. For a period of time, that worked brilliantly, you know, award-winning, ratings-winning, and I think inevitably the audience started to go, right, what else?
It was a week where there were 4 out of 5 nights had a presenter, a man walking around a field talking about historical subjects.
A very pretty field. And if you've seen Cunk on Britain, there's a brilliant moment at the top of Cunk on Britain, which is Shane's commission, where there's a sort of helicopter shot, and you know the big top. Here I am, welcome to this show. And a lot of the shows looked a bit like that, and you know, great. And so I'm still committed to having expert voices on the channels. I'm still committed to finding those new voices, and in fact carrying on working with people like Mary Beard, who I think are brilliantly idiosyncratic, but we have a premium now on going, not just are they people who know their stuff, but people who offer something different.
Easier, though, with contemporary history? I mean, have you started at the easier end of the spectrum? What are you going to do?
Yeah, good question. It's a really good question. Further back's harder. You know, that's the truth. I mean, Elizabeth I Secret Agents was, I think, a really good example of actually evolving a form which probably started with The Last Days of Anne Boleyn. It was a sort of step on from that. That had multiple expert voices in it. I think that series felt incredibly contemporary.
Why did you put a presenter on House Through Time?
Huh. Yes, Emma Willis would ask that question as well. So, when House Through Time was pitched, that was a very long development. It was it's probably the best piece of development work I've ever seen. It was 25 grand to basically go and stand up that this series could be made with a single house. I wasn't sure. It felt like maybe you could do a different house each week, but Emma really believed it should be a single house over multiple episodes. When the research came through, it was like reading this brilliant novel. Someone should write that novel. I mean, I read it sort of in bed going, God, this is great. And then this happened, and this happened. It's like reading a thriller. And Emma really... Get
your pictures to Tom in bed.
Exactly.
Clearly.
Please don't imagine that's a horrible image for you. I'm sorry. Pyjamas. Vape. Anyway, now I'm having a disturbing image. Anyway, so
we all are.
Emma felt very strongly it shouldn't have a presenter on it. I felt very strongly it should have a presenter on it, specifically because of the thing you're talking about, which is if it's not in living memory, probably episodes 3 and 4 would work without a presenter on it. Episodes 1 and 2, how do you bring to life the story of Victorians who you don't even have pictures of, or etchings of, or drawings of? They're a name in a newspaper, a name in a census. And so for me, actually, and I think David Olusoga is brilliant in A House Through Time, because I think not only does he emote, which he feels that he creates a personal connection with the stories of these people, but he also provides a context that otherwise you'd be delivering in comm. So, but I think House Through Time, look, people think of it as a contemporary series. The first two and a bit episodes are set in the 19th century, and one of the reasons I'm proud of House Through Time, and again, for any of you thinking of pitching, what I love about House Through Time is it's such a simple device, and its connection is to all of us, whether you own a house or rent a house, whether you've ever owned or rented, we've all lived in a bloody house. And so a bit like genealogy with Who Do You Think You Are, there is something universal about going, it's a question I think we probably, I ask in bed, no I don't, who lived in this house? Who lived in the house that I live in? And I think that universal quality is also something we're looking for.
Really interesting to unpack that. But Lucy, it sometimes feels like sort of the industry as a whole is sort of, it's sort of obsessed with younger audiences, a lot of focus on sort of innovation and new and meanwhile, Channel 5 is sort of quietly making a real success of sort of, blockbuster, sort of specialist factual subject matter, quite, sort of familiar presenting talent, and sort of just very sort of steadily and quite ruthlessly maybe going after the older audience. Is that a fair perception?
I mean, I think there's been a real revolution at Channel 5, really, in terms of specialist factual and history. I mean, if you looked at our output 4 or 5 years ago, we wouldn't probably have been having this conversation about sort of history and specialist factual. We've increased our hours phenomenally over the last sort of, 2 or 3 years. There was a period, actually, just after I joined, and the person who'd looked after a lot of history was leaving, and someone sort of said, oh, so there won't really probably be very much history on Channel 5 now. And actually, interestingly, quite the reverse has happened. And it feels that somehow we've managed to capture something, somehow we've managed to bring an audience to history on Channel 5. I mean, I think it's...
Have you been surprised, actually, by the fact that
I've been really surprised. I mean, things like Pompeii, which I'm going to show a clip of later, so I won't talk too much about it now, but, we looked very hard, and I'll talk more about this, at ways to try and do that very familiar subject in a sort of fresh, new way. And it did phenomenally well. Someone sent me the consolidated ratings last night before this session, and I think the first step got 1.9.
I saw it beat Love in the Countryside.
Yeah, I mean,
classic,
exactly, and sort of it sustained over the 3 nights as well. So I think it really is having a moment, and that's, the big sort of blockbuster series are enabling us to sort of take more risks. So they've enabled us to do things like our series about Rome, 8 Days That Made Rome, which again...
You say risk, but just unpack that a bit for the audience, because I mean, Rome is like, you know, the ultimate mainstream blockbuster subject.
But if you look at the different episodes on Rome, I mean, our 8th episode in our Rome series was about Constantine bringing Christianity to the Roman Empire, and who would have thought Channel 5 would have had a programme like that right at the heart of its schedule? You know, and also 8 episodes on Rome. I mean, okay, so Rome's a familiar subject, but to go, you know, to do 8 episodes, sort of, it's not definitive, but it's a really comprehensive look at you know, the history of the empire.
It felt quite a bold move for 5.
It was bold.
You know,
yeah, I think
Would
so.
you do it again?
That's a really good question. I mean, we did 2 8-part series last year, and I think they are difficult. I mean, last year at Sheffield, we were talking about sort of box set culture, and does that apply to Specialist Factual? And I think it is a tricky one. I mean, you know, Rome sustained. We were really pleased with it. We commissioned it really actually as a sort of prestige piece to get rated, to get sort of, you know, profile for the channel.
And to signal direction.
And to signal
travel,
direction,
right.
exactly. So, and we did that really well. And then it did, you know, pretty decently, I think. I think, again, I was looking at the figures, and over the 8 parts, I think they came in just shy of 1 million, which again, for something that isn't necessarily the most accessible subject, and we covered a real range of subjects across the series, I think is really good, and I was sort of really delighted by that. Yeah.
Having shown that that's possible, though, on 5.
So sorry, I didn't answer your question. The 8 parts,
pull back a little from...
It's a really good question. So I haven't commissioned any 8 parts since. I think 8 parts is a long time. It's really hard to get...
Rewrite all those treatments. 4 or 6.
I mean, it is hard to get the audience to commit to 8 episodes. Right. So I think I never say never, but I think at the moment I'm more interested in sort of 3, 4, 6 episodes than I am. We also did Elizabeth Our Queen as a sort of 8-parter. But I think, you know, they can be a challenge.
Okay. Should we play the clip?
Yes, that would be great.
Do you want to say anything about it? Or?
Yeah, I mean, so the series about Pompeii, I think, was a really interesting one for us. And I've picked the pre-title because what's interesting, I think, about Pompeii is it's stripped storytelling history done as an event, which is you know, we did Great Fire about a year ago. We've sort of developed it, I think, and moved it on a bit this year. And I think it's a really interesting direction of travel for us, and it's worked, which has been delightful.
Can we play the clip, please? Oh, it's always good to have the word disaster in the free title, isn't it? What
Bethany somehow, whenever Bethany says disaster, it never sounds like a disaster.
Right. What do you think the Channel 5 audience loved about that show, and what can people here take out of that as touch points?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's quite interesting about that, and you know, we've been talking about presenters, is that I think it's quite interesting to have a sort of a gang of 3 presenters. So we've seen that in other genres on TV, you know, Coast and all sorts of series like that. We're quite familiar with it. But I think having those 3 contrasting presenters, apologies, my voice is slightly going, but having those 3 contrasting presenters was really interesting for different elements of our audience. So you've got Bethany, who's the real expert and, you know, who's a classicist and knows Pompeii inside out and backwards. You've got Raksha, who's a kind of, she's been on Time Team in the past, but she's never worked as a presenter, so she's kind of your enthusiastic newbie who knows something about the archaeology. And then you've got John Sargent, who's your kind of amateur, basically. He's interested in history, but he's no expert. And I think having those kind of 3 people hold your hand on the journey, you know, is really interesting. John was able to kind of at times lighten the moment, so he would go off to Pompeii, he would go off to Naples and see kind of, you know, what was still going on in Naples that would have been going on at the time of Pompeii.
Massage parlours.
Exactly, massage parlours, kind of what would they have been eating at the time, you know, that the eruption happened. So it kind of gave you 3 different entry points, and I think that was really interesting for the audience, and I think felt quite different for history actually as well.
Was, if people are sort of bringing, I presume you're going to do more, if people are bringing thoughts, does it have to be as mainstream blockbuster subject matter as Pompeii?
I think it does really help for us if you have a broad subject that is going to get an audience. And then the challenge is to think, okay, how can we take this broad popular subject and do it in a really different, fresh way? How can we do it in a way that is going to feel like we haven't seen it a million times before? And I think, you know, Pompeii, I think anyway, I don't know whether everyone would agree, but I think it really did feel fresh. You know, I think that ticking clock device that we used meant that it wasn't just stripped for the sake of it. The stripping was kind of marbled through the DNA of that series. There was a real logic. You know, you wanted to come back the next night because you wanted to find out what had happened, you know, what had happened to the city. We followed those 48 hours. So I'm really interested in trying to do more pieces that feel like event TV, that might be stripped. I think it's a great direction for history. But I think you have to really think about how does it earn its strip? You know, what makes people want to come back the next night? And that is quite hard. I mean, we've done a series about nocturnal Britain. We may have time for a clip later where we've used some really new technology to show animal life at night. You know, what do animals get up to when we've all gone to bed? And I'm sort of internally having the debate about whether that works as a strip or not. I really wanted the narrative arcs from the animals to play over the 3 nights, and that sort of didn't quite pan out how I hoped. So I still really like the series a lot, but I think that's the challenge, to think, does the strip really earn its place? You know, has it got a kind of unfolding narrative that makes you want to come back for night 2 and night 3?
Tom, I mean, the BBC's done a number of stripped events or as live events in the specialist Factual
Yes,
space.
sometimes with John Sargent.
Sargent,
He's obviously
amazing.
the man for a gang show. Yeah.
He's the new Lara Croft.
Exactly.
Himself. Is that something that you would have thought about commissioning?
Do you know, it's interesting because, I mean, it's shape, yes, definitely. I mean, I think whether it's live like Spring Watch and the Watches continues to do amazing business, or sort of as live a la World's Busiest Railway or the original series of Inside the Factory, we know that there's an audience for a gang show with a stripped event, with that sense that you're doing something which is sort of big, broad, popular, and they're giving you something special. I guess, in truth, with Pompeii, I both admire Channel 5 for commissioning it, because in some ways, Lucy's right, there aren't many subjects which are sort of gangbuster, blockbuster, you know you're going to bring an audience to it. I would feel really cautious about Pompeii unless someone said to me, this really is genuinely new and revelatory. And I haven't seen the series, Lucy, so I'm just going to trust you that it's 3 hours worth of revelation after revelation after revelation. I sort of... No, I didn't mean it like that. But one of the things I would say, because I really think Channel 5's specialist factual output is really bloody brilliant. I think it's brilliant because sometimes I think in television, I'm just going to say it, in television we commission sort of for each other. It's a sort of like, oh, what Channel 4 doing? What and we feel sort of chuffed with ourselves that we've done something that feels sort of like, oh, isn't it amazing? We've got that person or that person. I think what Channel 5 do, you can absolutely see it in terms of the return on their audience figures, is that they're speaking to an audience who want that kind of heartland specialist factual content. And then with that sense of, you know, one of the things that you can absolutely see from that pre-title is it feels like it's going to be pleasurable. You know, it's sort of, come with me, roll up, come with me, we're going to show you something, it's worth spending the time.
And it's in the sunshine.
And it's in the sunshine. I like Love Island. I like Cruising with Gemma. There's a theme emerging. But so I would say, as well as all the things I've talked about before, contemporary, timely, you know, I said right at the beginning of this, fun. What I really mean is pleasure. Like, I don't think we spend enough time in Specialist Factual thinking about pleasure.
Well, I think it's a really good point. And I often think sometimes history can feel like homework, and sometimes it can feel like something that you really enjoy spending an hour watching. And there's a real place for homework, and there's a real place for those kind of big thesis-driven pieces. But I think it's great when history can be really enjoyable. I mean, you're right, Tom.
Time was a hugely pleasurable watch, wasn't it? At a simple level.
Good God, and I also think you don't have to scrimp. I don't think they're separate choices. I don't think it's like clever or pleasurable. You know, I think our most successful series, and the Specialist Factual I admire most from the people sitting on this panel, is when you get that sweet spot between, God, that's smart, but it was also really pleasurable watch.
But also, there are very different ways of delivering history. I mean, we do it So another one of our announcements is Salvage Hunters the Restorers, which is all about, so we've taken a big brand, Salvage Hunters, and then spun it off in a very specialist factual way, which centres on the restoration of items. And actually, it felt incredibly risky when we commissioned it, because it's very slow TV when you're watching someone whittle away at a Louis Vuitton trunk. But actually, it gives you the space to then unpack the history of Louis Vuitton trunks, and you know,
It's sort of male craft, isn't it?
It is male
which
craft.
your railways thing was in a funny kind of way.
And
as
it was
well.
great. It was just like so much stuff. The one thing that stuck out for me in that Louis Vuitton trunk was when he restored it, he then had his secret ingredients to restore it, had a little tin of coal dust. And he said, because when people used to travel, these trunks were built to be slammed onto trains and ocean liners which were powered by steam, and there was so much soot in the air. So he said, I'm going to rub some soot in, some coal dust, round the edges to make it feel authentic again. And it's just a very clever way of delivering history without having to have a presenter or say, this is a history show.
And keep the pleasure at the heart of it.
Yeah,
again.
exactly. And also really fulfilling what I feel is the role of Specialist Factual, is to take risks. And I think, actually, to your point, I think you can have Specialist Factual, which is also Populist Factual. I think it can reach big audiences if you do it right.
Shaminder, would you have commissioned Pompeii for Channel 4 thought about?
Before she answers that, can I just say that there were some new revelations?
I should have come back. I'm so sorry.
I just want
Okay, we've now got that clear. There was a lot.
just before Shaminder decides whether she would or wouldn't have commissioned it.
And it's also really interesting for everybody to talk really honestly,
Yes.
a bit honestly about sort of the difference.
Yeah.
What, you know, because you're all working for different channels. There's no one single right answer. But Shaminder,
Also,
would
I don't
you...
think that you necessarily need to say that
They don't want
the
you to
innovation.
No one gives a shit about whether I'm...
As I just said, it doesn't necessarily have to be finding that it wasn't in fact a volcanic eruption. It was actually an earthquake that did it. You know, in many ways, the innovations can be in terms of the way that you make the program.
form,
Just simply the approach. And already you can see that that's clearly going to be something that will work very well for a Channel 5 audience. You actually love the chemistry between the three presenters, and it's going to be a more accessible program than another channel might make. And I think that just finding the right flavor for the channel and then really driving that uniqueness so it really nails it for what your audience want is sometimes as important as just having a new discovery part of it.
So that yes, there's that affinity with sort of the channel tone. Shaminder.
As if anyone cared, really. But I thought it was brilliant, and we do have a secret history strand, which is all about revelation and revisit some of the kind of huge history.
And never executed like that.
But for me, my obsession is much more contemporary history, and I feel like what I would like to do a bit more of in our history is just to really look at those fascinating kind of contemporary and recent stories. So, and of course that's been done a lot, the brilliant BBC Stephen Lawrence thing, OJ, which is obviously amazing, game changer. We did a Trump series recently, which was using all that amazing archive to sort of tell the story of modern America and all the forces that helped shape it and helped create what is Donald Trump.
Would you have commissioned Tom's Grenfell film, do you think, or thought about it?
Oh, we thought about similar things, and I thought it was really interesting. And yes, maybe, but I suppose what I'm obsessed a bit more about is those kind of really sort of fascinating events that would be really interesting to look at from today's point of view about what they mean. So like thinking about relatively young people now who will have some vague memory of sort of Hillsborough or Lockerbie or Rodney King or things like that. How do we, not necessarily those, but I'm saying those kind of things, how do we revisit those recent events and make something, utterly compelling, maybe multi-parts? We've got something that's being made at the moment that is looking at a really interesting, and I'm not allowed to say what it is, but is that kind of box setty, a fascinating, not very well-known or iconic event, but a really fascinating murder story, but that tells you loads and loads about modern Britain.
It's not the Tony Martin thing that you
No, but that's also a very good example of...
Why did you, so just using that one as an example, What made you feel it was really important to go back and look at the Tony Martin story again? I mean, it is a story that's been told several times. So what was the added ingredient for you guys?
That's something that Rob Coldstream commissioned. And I think what's brilliant, I'm not the world expert on that, but obviously I know a bit about it. But what's fascinating about that is that it's a drama piece, which is using the actual testimony from the police interviews, which feels like an incredibly fresh and genuinely, to me, innovative way of sort of playing with the form and the storytelling. So you're going to sort of hear amazing actors sort of say real words, which will have all the sort of intensity of that moment with the policing. But also it's got kind of huge resonance because, I mean, you know, which we're talking about only recently, about what are the kind of ethics around when you could basically shoot someone who's trespassing on your property. And there was a brilliant story recently in Croydon, which was kind of massively covered because of that reason about our individual choices. So it felt like a really interesting way of telling a recent story that has incredibly powerful resonances for sort of arguments we're having now. So I think it's possible and really interesting to revisit things we know about and other stories we don't know that much
about. But recent history, that's your sort of biggest
that would be my feeling for how we would like to move forward.
At Channel 4. Hamish, moving from contemporary to further back, what are you looking for at Nat Geo? I mean, we're hearing an enormous amount about sort of scale and sort of $10 million series and sort of, you know, a lot of marketing effort certainly going into that sort of new Nat Geo 2.0 sort of positioning that you've talked about, I think, quite a bit sort of on panels. But how are you combining that with, you know, the necessities of commissioning for linear channels, you know, getting from, you know, those pieces don't come out of nowhere always. How are you sort of trying to commission, and what are you looking for at the moment that sits with that, you know, much trumpeted premium strategy, but also is quite sort of real world and could be managed on sort of?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a good question because I think that when channels do a big kind of transition of content, it often takes producers quite a lot of time to catch up with what the channel is looking for. And we've been really heading in this new direction for coming on for 3 years now. But because the big international cable channels operate in this country slightly under the radar, it almost takes producers a little bit of time to catch up with what we're looking for, and I think they fully have caught up now. I think that what we are definitely looking for are things that have got the kind of scale that we can really market and promote them, where they are going to be things that really feel identifiably National Geographic. You wouldn't find them in that form on another channel. And also, you know, by scale, we often mean budget. So not always, but often our budgets are really considerably higher than the price points that you would get for working for a terrestrial channel in the UK. And I think that producers have begun to figure all that out and really kind of get the metrics of what we are looking for. And often, it really does come down to innovation, and it can be innovation in terms of a new discovery, a new archaeological discovery, or a new expedition, or it can be innovation in terms of new journalism, or it can be innovation in terms of taking archive and using it in an entirely new way.
So reel off a couple of titles that would fit that, recent titles that would fit that brief.
Well, for example, I would say that we did a show at Christmas about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which was the first time that there had ever been televised access into this actual shrine, which is said to contain the site where Jesus lay. No one had ever had a camera in there.
That you slid in there.
Yeah, well, that's a different discussion. But the fact of that access made it really worth doing. And the show that I brought a clip of, I think, is a very good example of how this can work, because this show, which is about the Maya, was originally a one-off program made by a small UK indie, Wild Blue, which was on Channel 4 in the UK and on National Geographic everywhere else. And we can do those kinds of co-productions. But in the course of the survey, it was a LiDAR survey of these Guatemalan sites, the Mayan sites in Guatemala. And the LiDAR can now effectively strip away the rainforest and get an amazingly crystal clear view of what lies underneath. And discovered not only new roads and avenues and temples, but whole cities that hadn't been known about. It's a genuine breakthrough in terms of Mayan archaeology. And what we can do, what is great about National Geographic now, is that you can then return to that with real scale. And so, again, this is something that's great to be able to announce today, which is that we've now commissioned a 4-part series going back to really investigate what those new discoveries are, with expeditions to go and find them. And it'll be a full explanation of the Mayan kingdoms, but with absolutely new archaeology. And I think if you just said, here's a show about the Mayans, a series about the Mayans, it'd be quite difficult to promote it or get people to come and see it. But if you can really hold out the offer that this is never before seen, it's groundbreaking and new, it moves it to a whole completely different level.
Do you think I should ask him how many journalistic revelations there are on the show?
Well,
I was about to ask.
I knew you were going to do that. Shall we play it?
It doesn't have John Sargent getting any massages whatsoever.
Damn. Shall we play the clip? We're very tight for time, so just a quick question to you, Hamish. How important was it that he was a National Geographic explorer to the Commission, or was that sort of accident secondary?
Well, it's a terrific resource for us that the National Geographic has its own academic.
But would it be important for an indie to bring that?
Certainly not absolutely necessary, but I think that for me, the thing is we're so much more joined up now with the US and with the channels absolutely worldwide than we used to be. And the opportunity really is now to make 8-part series, 10-part series, and we're getting more and more of those through, frequently from UK production companies, also from companies elsewhere in the world. And I think that the US channels allow us to put much more resource in there, and where we can join up with the US channel, we can really scale things up.
We were going to talk about talent. We're really short for time. I'm sorry that we're not going to be able to talk about that more. I know, we're being told. Can we just play the last clip? No, she's going like that, she's going like that.
That is outrageous.
2 minutes.
Those clips.
2 minutes. Shaminder, tell me, how hard has it been to sort of try and land that kind of voice on the channel?
Is this like in 10 seconds? Or, okay. That is Lem Cisse, who's a poet, and he was brought up in care, has sort of an amazing story about how he was a baby, basically sort of feels like he had his life and his identity stolen from him. He's become a really successful poet, and he's exposing, well, kind of investigating the state of the care system in Britain today, and there'll be some performance in it, and that is literally, like, it's only literally just started filming, so that's why that was sort of so rough. But what it tells you is about how much we want to, in every bit of Specialist Factual, sort of explore, the state of Britain today and kind of get under the skin of things that we don't get to find out about very much. So we're really excited about that. And then the other clip that was actually, I said we have brilliant clips. The more fun clip was the other one. The other clip was from the Big Nasty Show, which is a Specialist Factual and entertainment sort of co-project. And it's a sort of really funny show presented by Big Nasty and Mo Gilligan, which has sort of comedy and like live chat, but is also going to have brilliant reports, and it's going to be a brilliant way of, again, sort of getting under the skin and getting into places like, we're hoping he's sort of going to go and hang out in Eton and sort of show sides of British life that we don't normally see. And obviously you'll also notice that both of those talents are black. It's part of our efforts to really sort of ramp up our efforts to make our talents on Channel 4 really feel like they reflect modern Britain. And just quickly on diversity, though, it's about women, it's about diverse voices, it's about all our favourite white men as well. We still love them, but it's also not just on screen. It's about everything we do within our organisation and our own sort of people who work at Channel 4, but who we work with, and we want to have our diversity thing, that it's about the whole industry and sort of finding all the best talents in production and directing and writing, and not just on screen.
With Lem, did you find him and put him on the show, or did the indie bring him to you with the idea?
I mean, look, Lem is not an unknown voice.
No,
I'm not pretending he's not done TV before or anything like that. It's something that, lots of people were talking about Lem. This particular idea was to bring what is really important to me, which is to try and get into to have a bit of current affairs DNA, which is my news and current affairs background, sort of to bring that flavour and that kind of slightly sort of forensic, investigative and caring about revelation and kind of under the skin of Britain, but bringing that into our specialist factual thing. And so he's someone who, that particular idea of getting him to create a performance and properly dig deep into the sort of the state of the care system, which has many flaws that should be exposed, is what made it a special sort of combination.
So obviously, as you said, that's only just started filming, so it's hard for everybody to see the form of that, but it's arts meets journalism?
Yeah, I would say that. It's kind of, it's documentary with a bit of current affairs DNA, and so we'll have hopefully a bit of an eventy feel. You know, we want our things to feel big, like everyone here has been saying. We don't want these things to feel niche. We want it to feel big and broad and enjoyable, but it will be telling you stuff that you didn't know and taking you to places you haven't seen before with an exciting talent who's really got something to say, and that's really important to us.
Contemporary history with stopping.
All right.
We've got to stop. Sorry, it feels like it could easily go on for another 30 minutes, but thank you very much to all of the panel. It's been really revealing.